Cosmic Coffee Dates by Clara Marigold. Chapter 1: The Mysterious Patron. The Nebula Café was as familiar to Kira as the back of her hand. Nestled on the edge of the cosmic highway, between planets where travel was so fast you could blink and be halfway across the galaxy, it served as a brief respite for all manner of travelers, from alien diplomats sipping starry espressos to interstellar pirates who ordered their coffee with a side of quiet. Kira, the café's sole barista, had seen it all, and her routine was a comforting melody, each day flowing into the next, just like the ebb and flow of the cosmic tides outside. But today felt different. Kira polished a mug, her eyes wandering to the window, where the soft glow of nearby stars painted the sky in colors of deep violet and burnt orange. The café's low hum was punctuated by the occasional hiss of the espresso machine and the light chatter of customers, but there was an unusual stillness hanging in the air. It was as if the universe itself was holding its breath. Then, the door chimed. A man walked in. At first glance, there was nothing particularly extraordinary about him. Tall, with dark hair that seemed to shimmer in the soft café lights, he was dressed in a simple flight jacket, though the insignia on his sleeve was one Kira didn't recognize. His eyes, a deep shade of silver, were the kind that seemed to hold 1,000 stories. Kira couldn't help but feel a strange pull in her chest as he made his way to the counter. She had seen countless customers come and go, but there was something about him, something different. "Good evening," Kira greeted him, trying to maintain her usual composure. "What can I get for you today?" The man glanced at the menu, though Kira knew he wasn't really looking at it. His eyes flicked over the various coffee options, but his gaze soon returned to her, and he smiled, a slow, enigmatic smile that made Kira's heart skip a beat. "I'll have the Nebula brew, please," he said, his voice deep, yet smooth, like a soft melody. Kira raised an eyebrow. Nebula brew was a rare blend, a specialty of the café, and not many people dared to order it. The blend was said to have origins from the farthest reaches of the galaxy, harvested from the petals of a flower that bloomed only once every 100 years. The idea of using it as a drink was a bit absurd, but it was a bestseller, and the customers who ordered it were usually regulars with a taste for the exotic. She turned to prepare his drink, her fingers moving with practiced ease. But even as she poured the steaming coffee into the delicate crystal mug, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was no ordinary customer. The man watched her from his spot at the counter, his eyes never leaving her, as if studying her. "Is this your first time here?" Kira asked, trying to make small talk, though she had a hunch he wouldn't respond with anything simple. He tilted his head slightly, a glint of amusement in his gaze. "Something like that," he replied cryptically, his tone light but carrying an edge of mystery. "I tend to find my way to places like this, eventually." Kira's curiosity piqued. She slid the mug across the counter to him, the swirling steam rising from the nebula brew like a gentle nebula itself. "And what brings you to the Nebula Café?" The man took a long, deliberate sip, his eyes closing momentarily as if savoring the taste. When he opened them again, Kira noticed a faint shimmer in the depths of his silver gaze, as though they were reflecting the distant stars outside. "Just passing through," he said, setting the mug down carefully. "Though, I think I'll be staying a little longer than I originally planned." Kira leaned against the counter, her interest now fully captured. Something about his words, the way he said them, felt like a subtle invitation to ask more. But she held herself back. He was a stranger, after all. And yet, something in her gut told her that he wasn't just any traveler passing through. There was a story hidden in those words, something he wasn't saying. "I don't think I've seen you around before," Kira said, deciding to push a little further. "Are you a regular at any of the other cafes along the route?" He smiled again, that same enigmatic smile, and this time it sent a small shiver down her spine. "Not exactly," he said, his voice dipping lower, almost a whisper. "I prefer places that aren't listed in any guidebooks. Places that aren't so easy to find." Kira raised an eyebrow, intrigued but still cautious. "I see. Well, you're in luck. Nebula Café isn't exactly a hotspot for tourists. It's a good place to be lost." The man's smile widened. "I think that's exactly why I'm here." There was a moment of silence, an unspoken understanding hanging between them, before he picked up his mug and took another sip, the deep sound of the coffee swirling filling the otherwise quiet cafe. Kira wiped down the counter absent-mindedly, her mind racing. She had worked at this cafe for years and thought she had seen it all, but there was something undeniably magnetic about this man, something that felt as if it were drawing her in, like the gravity of a star. Just as she was about to ask him his name, the door chimed again, breaking the moment. A new customer entered, and Kira was forced to turn her attention to the new arrival, though her mind stayed firmly on the mysterious traveler. The man stood up, placing his mug back on the counter, and gave her a final look, one that felt like a promise, or perhaps a challenge. "I'll be back tomorrow," he said quietly, before turning and walking out of the cafe without another word. Kira watched him leave, her thoughts a swirl of questions. Who was he? And why did he feel so familiar, even though they had just met? But the answers would have to wait. She had learned long ago not to rush through the mysteries of the universe. They had a way of revealing themselves, in their own time, and something told her that the man who had just walked out of the Nebula Café had secrets written in the stars. Chapter 2: A Familiar Face. The next day, Kira couldn't shake the memory of the mysterious traveler. She found herself glancing toward the door of the Nebula Café every time it chimed, half expecting him to walk through it again. But the hours passed, and there was no sign of him. Maybe it had been a fleeting encounter, a momentary lapse in the universe that didn't need to be dissected. After all, in a place like the Nebula Café, people came and went all the time. Still, she couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that this particular visitor had left something behind, something that tugged at her curiosity. The usual crowd filled the café, a diplomat from Andromeda sipping on a hazy latte, a pair of merchant twins discussing their latest haul of rare beans from the distant moons of Ceres. Kira worked her usual rhythm behind the counter, crafting drinks with precision and ease. But her thoughts kept drifting back to him, the traveler with the silver eyes. Just as the sun began to set, casting a warm orange glow through the café's windows, the door chimed again. Her heart skipped a beat, and there he was, walking through the door with the same calm stride. The same confident smile that made Kira's stomach flutter. He was wearing the same flight jacket, though the insignia was slightly different today, as if it had been updated in the last few hours. Kira swallowed her surprise and forced herself to focus. "Back for more?" she asked, trying to sound casual as she wiped her hands on the cloth towel hanging from her apron. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, his silver eyes met hers, and for a moment, there was only silence, like the entire universe was holding its breath. Then he smiled, slow and easy. "I had to," he said. "You have the best coffee in this part of the galaxy." There it was again. That smile that sent a shiver down her spine. It was charming, but there was something about it that felt otherworldly. Clara shook her head, trying to push past the odd sensation creeping along her neck. "What can I get you today?" she asked, keeping her voice steady. His gaze flickered to the menu before settling back on her. "The Nebula brew, same as yesterday." "It's fitting." "Fitting?" Clara asked, raising an eyebrow. She hadn't expected him to explain his choice, but there was that same cryptic tone to his voice. She wasn't sure why, but she was starting to enjoy the mystery. "Just trust me on this one," he said with a wink, as if they were part of some shared secret that no one else understood. Clara turned to prepare the coffee, a small smile tugging at the corner of her mouth. It wasn't often she met someone who could make her feel so intrigued. As she worked, her hands moving effortlessly with the coffee machine, she couldn't help but think about the peculiar connection she felt to this stranger. Was it just her imagination? Or was there more to him than met the eye? She slid the mug of Nebula brew across the counter to him, and this time, their fingers brushed lightly as he took it. She looked up at him, catching a fleeting glimpse of something unspoken, flashing in his eyes. That he took a sip, his expression softening with enjoyment. "Perfect," he murmured, as if the taste of the coffee was the key to some larger puzzle he was trying to solve. "Glad you like it," Clara replied, her voice a little softer than usual. She wasn't sure why, but something about him made her feel connected. There was no explanation for it, and she wasn't one to believe in fate, but she couldn't deny the magnetic pull she felt when he was near. The door chimed again, breaking the moment. The café was beginning to fill with customers, and Clara quickly turned to take their orders. But when she glanced back, the traveler hadn't moved from his spot. He was watching her, an unreadable expression on his face. "Are you here for long?" Clara asked, trying to fill the silence between them. It was a harmless question, though her curiosity was growing by the second that he set his mug down and leaned forward slightly, as if sharing a secret. "I'm not sure yet. I like to stay in places, until I feel like I've learned everything I need to." He paused, his gaze holding hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "But I think I'll stay long enough to see where this leads." The air between them shifted, the words hanging in the space around them, weighted with unspoken meaning. Clara felt the heat of 1,000 questions bubbling in her chest. What did he mean by that? Why did he keep showing up? And why did it feel like he wasn't just talking about coffee? Before she could ask anything else, the traveler stood up and placed a few credits on the counter. "I'll be seeing you tomorrow, Clara," he said, his voice warm and low. She blinked, taken aback. "How did you? I know your name," he interrupted with a smile that was both reassuring and unnerving. "And I'll be back. Don't worry." With that, he turned and walked out of the café, leaving Clara standing behind the counter, her mind racing. Tomorrow. He was coming back tomorrow. But what did that mean? And why was he so intent on returning? the questions lingered in the air, unanswered for now. But Kira couldn't help but feel a stirring in her chest, a sense that something important was unfolding, something bigger than just a coffee order. Whatever it was, it had only just begun. Chapter 3: The Stars Speak. Kira spent the rest of the evening in a haze, the hum of the café's activity muted by the constant replay of the traveler's cryptic words in her mind. "I'll stay long enough to see where this leads." It was one of those lines that seemed harmless at first but grew heavier with every thought. She had always been content in her quiet corner of the galaxy, serving coffee to travelers who rarely stayed long enough to leave an impression. But this man, this traveler, was different. He didn't just drink his coffee and leave. He lingered in her thoughts, his silver eyes, his voice, the way his words seemed to carry weight beyond their surface meaning. As the cafe emptied and the last few patrons finished their drinks, Kira found herself staring out the large window that overlooked the spaceport. The stars were distant pinpricks of light in the dark velvet sky, but to Kira, they had never seemed more relevant. Was it possible that something was waiting for her out there, among the stars? Could the answers to her questions lie beyond the reaches of this tiny cafe? Her thoughts were interrupted by the soft chime of the doorbell. She turned, half expecting it to be one of the regulars or a late-night traveler. But when she saw him standing in the doorway, her heart skipped a beat. The traveler was back, earlier than expected. The familiar warmth spread through her chest, though she couldn't tell if it was excitement or nerves. "Back again?" she asked, her voice a mix of curiosity and something else she couldn't quite place. That he gave her that knowing smile, the one that made him seem like he held the universe's secrets just behind his eyes. "I couldn't stay away," he said, his tone light but layered with something deeper. He stepped inside, removing his jacket, revealing the same flight suit he had worn the previous day. It was starting to feel like a uniform of sorts, a mark of his mysterious presence in her life. "I was hoping to try something new today," he continued, settling into his usual seat by the window. "A bit of an experiment." Kira raised an eyebrow. "An experiment? With coffee?" She was intrigued but also mildly amused. In her experience, most people came in to relax, not to push the boundaries of their caffeine intake. He nodded, a spark of mischief in his silver eyes. "Exactly. I've been thinking about the perfect combination. A drink that somehow mirrors my journey. The places I've been, the people I've met. Something that feels both familiar and unknown." Kira smiled softly. The way he spoke was like poetry, each sentence crafted with intent, like he was searching for meaning in everything, even in a cup of coffee. "I think I can help with that," she said, her hands already moving to prepare the drink. As she worked, she couldn't help but notice the way he watched her, his eyes never leaving her hands as she carefully measured and blended the ingredients. It was as if he were studying her, as if every movement she made held some deeper significance. As the coffee brewed, she tried to think of a drink that could possibly live up to his poetic description. It wasn't about the typical combinations anymore, it had to be something special. Something that felt otherworldly. When she placed the cup in front of him, she took a step back, observing his reaction closely. The deep, swirling pattern of steam rising from the mug seemed to shimmer in the low light of the cafe. He took a sip, his expression unreadable for a moment. Then, his eyes widened slightly, and a soft exhale escaped his lips. "This," he began, his voice full of awe, "this is perfect." Kira couldn't help the smile that tugged at her lips. "I'm glad you like it." "It's more than liking," he said, leaning forward. "It's as if you've captured a piece of me in this cup. The warmth of familiarity and the edge of the unknown. It's like it's been made with stardust and the echoes of distant planets." She laughed, the sound bright and genuine, and felt a warmth in her chest she hadn't expected. "I'm glad you feel that way. I was aiming for something with a little, cosmic flavor." For a moment, there was silence. The only sound was the soft hum of the coffee machines in the background. Then, he spoke again, his tone more serious now, as if the weight of his words had returned. "You have a gift," he said, studying her with an intensity that made her heart race. "But I think you already know that. There's something about you, Kira. Something that makes you different." Kira's smile faltered for just a second. Different? She wasn't sure what he meant, but the implication hung in the air, heavy and tantalizing. She wanted to ask him what he meant, wanted to know where this connection between them was going. But something inside her hesitated. Was she ready for the answers he might give? Before she could say anything, the door chimed again, this time heralding a new group of customers. The traveler didn't seem bothered by the interruption, though. His gaze never left hers, as if he were waiting for her to respond. I don't know what you mean," Kira said finally, her voice quiet but steady. "But I don't think it's me you're after. I'm just a barista in a coffee shop on the edge of the galaxy." He leaned back in his chair, the faintest trace of a smile playing on his lips. "Maybe. But I don't think the universe works in coincidences, Kira. You're exactly where you need to be. And so am I." Her heart fluttered. The way he spoke, with such certainty, made her question everything she thought she knew about fate and chance. Was it really possible that the universe had brought them together for some grand reason? As the new customers ordered their drinks and the café filled with noise, Kira couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was happening, something she couldn't yet understand. But whatever it was pulling her toward him, toward a future she never could have imagined, and for the first time in a long time, Kira found herself wondering what would happen next, not just with the café, but with the traveler who had so quietly woven himself into the fabric of her life. Chapter 4: Beneath the Surface. The next morning arrived with the usual bustle of the café. Kira was behind the counter, grinding beans and steaming milk, her movements automatic, but her mind was far from routine. The previous evening lingered in her thoughts, a sweet taste of something undefined, something impossible, that she couldn't shake. The traveler, his words, his eyes, everything about him felt like a riddle waiting to be solved. She had told herself that she'd treat him like any other customer. He was just another soul passing through the galaxy, like the countless others who stopped in for a drink, exchanged a few pleasantries, and moved on with their lives. But there was something about him that set him apart, something about the way he looked at her, the way he spoke that made her feel like she wasn't just part of the scenery in his life, like she mattered. As the café filled with the usual crowd of early morning travelers, Kira found herself glancing toward the door every now and then, half expecting to see him walk through it. She hadn't told him where she worked, so he couldn't possibly know she'd be here. Yet, her heart raced whenever the bell chimed, as if she were waiting for something, or someone, to appear. By mid-morning, Kira had made her peace with the fact that he might not show up again. After all, there were plenty of other coffee shops across the galaxy. He could have found one that was closer to where his ship was parked, one that didn't have the same lingering promise of something more. She sighed softly as she wiped down the counter, trying to focus on the task at hand. That was when she heard the unmistakable chime of the door. She looked up, a jolt of surprise flooding through her veins. There he was, standing in the doorway as if he had been waiting for the exact moment her thoughts had turned to him. He caught her eye, a knowing smile playing on his lips. It was as if he could read her mind. "Thought you might be waiting for me," he said, his voice smooth like the coffee she so carefully prepared. Kira couldn't help the smile that tugged at her lips. "I wasn't waiting," she said, though it was clear that she had been. "But it's nice to see you again." He walked in, the soft whir of the café machines filling the space between them as he took his usual seat by the window. There was something familiar in the way he carried himself, something that felt timeless. He seemed to belong here, in this little corner of the galaxy, even though Kira knew his presence was anything but ordinary. As she prepared his coffee, she found herself thinking about what had happened the night before, the way they had spoken, the intensity of their conversation. There was a connection between them, something deep and unspoken, that she couldn't quite define. She had to know more. She placed the cup of coffee in front of him, taking a moment to admire the way the steam swirled above the cup, dancing in the light. "What brings you back so soon?" she asked, trying to sound casual, though her curiosity was evident. He took a sip, his gaze never leaving her face. "I wanted to see if the universe has more to show me," he said, the words carrying a weight that seemed out of place for something so simple. "And maybe, to see if it has more to show you, too." Kira paused, her heart skipping a beat. There was something about the way he said it, something that made her feel like he wasn't just talking about coffee anymore. He was talking about something deeper, something that was still unraveling between them. She could feel it, like a tug on her chest, pulling her toward him. "More to show me," she repeated, her voice soft. He leaned forward, his hands clasped around the cup. "You have a way of making everything feel significant. Like every moment is part of something bigger. I've been to many places, met many people, but I've never felt this way before. As if the pieces are starting to come together, like the stars are finally aligned." Kira's heart raced. She wasn't sure if he was speaking metaphorically or if there was something more at play, but it felt like he was offering her a glimpse into something she hadn't dared to dream about. "What do you mean?" she asked, unable to keep the curiosity from her voice. He smiled again, that familiar, enigmatic smile. "I mean, Kira, that this coffee, this moment, might be a part of something greater. Something that neither of us can fully understand yet, but we're both part of it, whether we know it or not." Her breath caught in her throat. It was the way he spoke, like everything had meaning, like nothing was by chance. And yet, for all his mystery, there was a warmth in his presence, an openness that made her feel like she could trust him, even if she didn't fully understand what was happening between them. "You talk like you know something I don't," she said, her voice a whisper. He chuckled softly, his eyes twinkling with an amused sort of wisdom. "Maybe I do. But I think you know more than you realize. You just haven't had the right person to help you see it yet. Kira couldn't help but smile at his words, even though they left her with more questions than answers. Who was this man? And what was it about him that made her feel like she was standing at the edge of something she couldn't yet name? The door chimed again, and the moment between them seemed to stretch, as if time itself was holding its breath. Kira glanced toward the door, and for a moment, she almost wished she hadn't, because the next customer was a familiar face, her old friend, Iris, a regular at the café. But the interruption was brief, and soon Iris had settled into the corner with her usual order, leaving Kira and the traveler alone once more. You were saying? Kira prompted, her curiosity piqued that he took a deep breath, his gaze fixed on the distant stars through the café window. I think you're meant for something bigger, Kira. And maybe, just maybe, I'm meant to help you find it. The words hung in the air, heavy with possibility. Kira felt a mix of excitement and apprehension. Could this man, this mysterious traveler, really be the key to unlocking something she hadn't even known she was searching for? She didn't know the answer, but in that moment, with the hum of the café around them and the stars shining above, she was willing to find out. Chapter 5, Uncharted Territories. The next few days felt like a dream Kira was both chasing and trying to escape. Every time the bell above the door chimed, she found herself glancing up, hoping, waiting for him. The mysterious traveler. The man who had come into her life like a comet, streaking across her universe with words that lingered like stardust. That it had been 3 days since their last conversation, and though he hadn't returned to the café, Kira couldn't shake the feeling that something was unfolding between them. Something inevitable. The café was unusually quiet one late afternoon when she found herself cleaning the counter for the umpteenth time. She wiped it down, though the smudge marks had long since disappeared. Her mind wandered, replaying his words over and over again, as if she could make sense of them. You're meant for something bigger. What could he mean by that? Was he just a wanderer, spouting philosophical nonsense, or was there more to him than she could see? A soft click of the door startled her from her thoughts. Her heart fluttered, half expecting to see him walk through, but instead, it was a young couple, holding hands and laughing as they approached the counter. Kira forced a smile and greeted them, but her thoughts wandered again. She needed something to hold on to, a sign, a reason to keep believing that what had passed between her and the traveler hadn't been some random, fleeting moment. She handed the couple their drinks and watched them leave, just as the door clicked open again. This time, when she looked up, her breath caught in her throat. There he was. Standing at the door, the same enigmatic smile playing on his lips. He looked the same as always, tall, unassuming, yet somehow carrying an air of untold stories. The universe seemed to bend around him, as if it knew something she didn't. You came back, she said, her voice trembling slightly, betraying the excitement she felt. That he smiled, stepping inside, his presence lighting up the room in a way that Kira couldn't quite explain. You didn't think I'd leave without saying goodbye, did you? Her heart skipped. There it was again, the feeling that he was more than just a passerby in her life. That he was tied to something much bigger, just as his words had hinted. I didn't know if you were planning on returning, she admitted, her hands momentarily still as she prepared his usual. I didn't even know where to send the invitation to. I don't think I need an invitation, he replied with a wry smile. I come where I'm needed. And, it seems, I'm needed here. Kira raised an eyebrow as she slid the cup toward him. Needed here? For what? He sat down at his usual spot by the window, his gaze distant. It was as if the café had become more than just a stop along his journey. It had become a piece of the puzzle he was piecing together, and she was starting to wonder whether she was a part of that puzzle. You've got the stars in your eyes, Kira. They're hard to ignore, even from light years away, he said, his voice quieter now. But it's not just about what I see in you. It's about what you're meant to see. What's been waiting for you all along. Kira leaned against the counter, her heart racing. I don't know what you mean. You will, he said, his voice calm and steady. But for now, let's just say I'm here to help you navigate what you can't see. To show you what's beyond the limits of this café, of this world. Her breath caught in her throat. This was different from their first encounter. Then, it had felt like a casual exchange of ideas. But now it felt like something more. Something profound. She couldn't help but feel that, somehow, her life was about to take a turn, one she hadn't expected but had secretly yearned for. Is that all you do? She asked, her voice lighter now, despite the storm brewing inside. Help people find their way. His eyes flickered, a spark of something deeper in them. I help people see what they didn't know they were looking for. The path is never clear, Kira. But the more you search, the more you'll begin to understand. A heavy silence settled between them, and Kira felt the weight of his words. She wasn't sure if it was the heat of the coffee or something else entirely, but there was a rush of emotion inside her. A mix of excitement, confusion, and, perhaps, fear. Fear of what might be waiting for her if she allowed this connection to deepen. What if I don't know where to begin? She asked, the vulnerability she usually kept hidden slipping into her voice. That he tilted his head, studying her with a mixture of compassion and understanding. Then you begin where you are, Kira. It's all you can do. And I'll be right here, whenever you're ready to take the next step. Her heart skipped a beat at his words, the promise of something far greater than she had ever imagined starting to take root in her chest. It was as if she were standing at the edge of a cliff, about to leap into the unknown. The thrill of the unknown. Kira turned away to prepare another drink, her thoughts swirling. She couldn't explain it. She couldn't rationalize why she felt so drawn to him, why his presence seemed to resonate with a deeper part of herself. But somehow, she knew that this moment, this connection, was the beginning of something bigger than she could possibly understand. The traveler had returned to her life, and for the first time in years, Kira felt like the stars might be aligning. Chapter 6, Through the Veil of Stars. The days seemed to blur together as Kira continued her quiet dance of serving coffee and waiting for the next glimpse of the traveler. Each morning, she opened the café with the hope that he might walk through the door, as if his very presence had somehow become an anchor for her, a strange, magnetic force that pulled her through the monotony of everyday life. But he hadn't returned. At least, not in the way she expected. The café, once a sanctuary of comforting routines and familiar faces, now felt like an empty stage. Kira couldn't shake the sensation that something was missing. As if the moment she'd shared with him, their quiet conversation about the stars and his cryptic words about her future, had left an unspoken promise hanging in the air. She had tried to brush it off, to carry on with her normal routine, but the absence of him weighed heavily on her heart. On the sixth day, as Kira wiped down the counter, the bell above the door chimed again, and her pulse quickened. She didn't need to look up to know who it was. She could feel him. Like a familiar pulse in the air, the vibrations of his presence seemed to ripple through the room. "Hello again, Kira," the traveler's voice broke the silence, smooth and warm as ever. She looked up, her breath catching in her throat. He stood at the door, his usual casual clothes giving nothing away. But his eyes, those endless pools of cosmic mystery, held something different today. Something more. "You're back," she said, though it wasn't a question. It was a relief. "I never really left," he replied with a small smile, stepping inside and walking over to the counter. Kira's heart fluttered, but she forced herself to steady her breathing. "I thought you might have gone off to your next adventure." He shook his head, his gaze softening. "There are some things you just can't run away from, no matter how far you go." She hesitated, watching him as he took his usual seat by the window. It was as if he was settling into a familiar space, a place that no longer felt like a stop on a journey but a part of his story. Her story. "Did you come here to tell me more riddles?" Kira asked, trying to keep the lightness in her voice, but it trembled just the same. He chuckled, a low, quiet sound that made her heart skip. "Not riddles. But maybe I can offer you some answers, if you're ready to hear them." Kira's heart thudded in her chest. Was she ready? To hear whatever truths he was offering. To understand what he had meant by his cryptic words that had haunted her for days. "I don't know if I'm ready for anything more," she said quietly, almost to herself. "I don't know if I even know what I'm supposed to be doing anymore." He leaned forward, eyes locked onto hers, a gaze so intense it made Kira feel like he could see right through her. "You've always known, Kira. Sometimes the hardest part is admitting it to yourself. The stars didn't align for us to meet by accident. You're meant to see something bigger than this café, bigger than the world you've known." She bit her lip, uncertainty flooding her. "But what if I don't want to see it? What if I'm not ready for whatever this is?" The traveler's eyes softened, and for the first time, Kira noticed the faintest glimmer of something resembling vulnerability in them. "You might not feel ready. But you are, whether you know it or not. Sometimes, we don't get to choose when the universe decides to change us." Kira swallowed hard, feeling the weight of his words sink deep into her chest. "I'm just a barista. What could I possibly have to offer to a universe this big?" The traveler stood up slowly and walked over to her, his presence like a comforting shadow. He placed his hand on the counter between them, his touch gentle but full of intent. "You may think you're just a barista, Kira, but there's far more to you than that. You've already made an impact on more lives than you realize, one cup of coffee at a time. But there's a bigger picture at play here. And you're a part of it." Kira's mind raced, her thoughts a whirlwind of confusion and wonder. She had always felt like there was something more, something she couldn't put her finger on, but hearing him speak with such certainty stirred something inside her. A yearning. A desire to understand. To see the bigger picture. "I don't understand," she whispered, feeling lost and vulnerable in the face of his calm certainty. The traveler stepped back and smiled, a slow, knowing smile that held 1,000 untold stories. You don't have to understand it all right now. But every journey begins with a single step, Kira. And right now, you're already on the path. You just need to trust that. Kira's eyes searched his face, and for a moment, the world outside the cafe seemed to fade away. It was just the two of them in that quiet space, caught in an invisible web of fate. What path? She asked softly. The traveler looked out the window, his gaze distant. The one that leads you to the stars. The one where you'll see things beyond your wildest imagination. But first, you need to look beyond what you think you know. She felt a pang of something, fear, maybe, but also excitement. What if he was right? What if everything she had ever known was only the beginning of something much larger? You won't be alone on this journey, Kira, he said, his voice steady and reassuring. I'll be with you, every step of the way. Her heart fluttered, and for the first time, she wasn't sure whether to be scared or exhilarated. The universe was vast. The possibilities endless. And for reasons she still didn't fully understand, her place in it had just begun to unfold. For the first time in a long while, Kira felt ready to take that step into the unknown. Ready to see the universe through a new lens, and she knew, without a doubt, that her journey, our journey, was only just beginning. Chapter 7: Unveiling the Cosmos. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with hues of purple and orange as Kira wiped down the counter, her thoughts still tangled in the words of the mysterious traveler. His presence had left her feeling like she was standing at the edge of something vast and uncharted. But the world around her, the café, the routine of serving coffee, still felt so small, so familiar. She couldn't help but wonder if she was ready to take the leap. Could she really leave the world she knew behind, the life she'd built here? Could she trust the traveler and the cosmic journey he seemed to be offering? The door chimed again, and Kira turned with a start. Her breath caught as her eyes locked onto the familiar figure, his dark hair tousled, eyes glimmering with secrets, and the unmistakable air of someone who had seen worlds beyond this one. Kira, he said softly, stepping inside. His voice, that voice, made her heart beat faster. There was something about him that felt both like home and like the unknown, something magnetic that she couldn't escape. I wasn't sure if you'd be here tonight, he continued, his voice low and steady. I'm always here, Kira replied, trying to keep her tone light, but she felt a flicker of unease in her chest. I never leave the cafe. The traveler smiled, but it wasn't his usual knowing smile. This time, there was something more serious about it. That's why you're stuck. In this place, in this moment. You're holding yourself here, Kira. You've been doing it for so long, you don't even realize it. Kira blinked, taken aback by the weight of his words. What do you mean? I mean that the stars don't wait for anyone, he said, his voice tinged with urgency. You're waiting for something to happen, but it won't. You need to step outside of this comfort zone. It's not enough to just dream about the cosmos. You have to live it. Step into the unknown. Kira felt a chill run down her spine. He was right. She had spent so much time dreaming about adventure, about the vastness of the universe, but when it came down to it, she was still here, behind the counter, serving coffee to customers. She was still in her little corner of the world, watching the stars through the window and wishing for something more. "I'm not sure I can just leave," Kira said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I have a life here. A job. People who expect me to show up every day." The traveler reached out and placed a hand on the counter, his fingers brushing hers. The touch sent a jolt through her, a warmth that spread from her fingertips to the very core of her being. "But what about your heart, Kira? What about what you really want?" Her breath caught in her throat as she stared at him, at the raw intensity in his eyes. She had never allowed herself to think about that before, not fully. She had buried her desires, tucked them away beneath the layers of her daily life. But now, with the traveler standing before her, those desires began to surface, like bubbles rising to the surface of water. "I want," Kira started, but the words got tangled in her throat. What did she want? Was it to escape this life? To follow the stars and uncover the mysteries the traveler spoke of? Or was it something else? Something deeper, more personal? "You want more," the traveler said, as though reading her mind. "You want to feel alive. To experience life in a way you never have before." Kira nodded slowly, her eyes fixed on him. "I don't know if I can leave everything behind. I don't know if I'm brave enough." The traveler smiled gently. "You don't have to do it alone, Kira. You're already on your way. You've taken the first step, just by considering it. The universe doesn't expect you to have all the answers. It just asks that you trust yourself enough to take the leap." A sense of calm washed over her. It wasn't the certainty she had expected, but something far more powerful. It was trust, the trust that no matter where the journey took her, she wouldn't be alone. And that, somehow, made all the difference. "I've been thinking about everything you said," Kira admitted, her voice trembling slightly. "And I think you're right. I think I'm ready." The traveler's eyes lit up with warmth, and he stepped closer. "Good. Because the stars are waiting for you." He reached into his bag and pulled out a small device, no bigger than the palm of his hand. It looked like a compass, but the metallic surface gleamed with an otherworldly glow, as if it had been made from the very fabric of the universe itself. "This is for you," he said, holding it out. "A key, of sorts. To open the door to the journey ahead. It's not just about leaving this place behind, Kira. It's about embracing what's to come." Kira's heart raced as she took the device from his hand. It hummed faintly in her palm, a gentle pulse that seemed to synchronize with her own heartbeat. She looked up at him, eyes wide with wonder. "What is it?" she asked, her voice filled with awe. "It's a guide," the traveler explained. "It will lead you to the next step. But only if you trust it. Only if you're willing to take that first step into the unknown." Kira's fingers tightened around the device, the weight of it both comforting and exhilarating. She didn't know what the future held. She didn't know what was waiting for her beyond the walls of the café. But in that moment, standing with the traveler, holding the key to the stars, Kira knew one thing for certain: her life was about to change. And no matter what came next, she was ready. Chapter 8: The Leap of Faith. The hum of the mysterious device in Kira's hand filled the silence of the café as the traveler watched her closely, his dark eyes searching her expression for any sign of hesitation. She felt the weight of the moment, like she was standing on the edge of an abyss, ready to take the plunge. But even as the butterflies swirled in her stomach, a part of her felt an exhilarating thrill. This was it. This was the moment she had been unknowingly waiting for. Clara held the device tightly, her fingers tracing the smooth contours. It wasn't heavy, but it felt impossibly important, like holding a piece of the universe itself. The traveler hadn't said much more about it, only that it would show her the way, but she could feel the power in it. She could feel it calling to her, urging her to act. "I've never done anything like this before," Clara murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. She looked at the traveler, searching his face for any reassurance. "I've spent my whole life here, at the café, in this city. How do I just leave all of that behind?" The traveler stepped closer, the warm glow of the setting sun casting a golden halo around him. "You don't have to leave it all behind, Clara. You don't have to cut ties or sever connections. You're not running away, you're moving forward. The journey isn't about abandoning everything, it's about finding a new path, one that will lead you to something greater than you've ever known. You're already part of something much bigger than this café, bigger than this city." His words were simple, but they struck deep. The doubts that had been swirling in her mind began to quiet. There was a truth to them, a kind of quiet clarity she couldn't ignore. Maybe she didn't have to have everything figured out. Maybe it was okay to take that leap of faith, even if she didn't know exactly where it would lead. Clara looked down at the device again, and as she held it, she felt the pulse intensify, a soft vibration that seemed to resonate with the very core of her being. Slowly, she raised her eyes to the traveler. "Are you really sure this is the right time?" she asked, her voice laced with uncertainty. The traveler smiled, his face gentle but knowing. "The right time is whenever you choose it to be. If you're ready, if you trust yourself enough, then the time is now." Clara took a deep breath, feeling the weight of her decision pressing down on her shoulders. The world beyond the café seemed distant, almost surreal, like a dream she had only recently started to dare to believe in. She had always been afraid of taking risks, of stepping out of her comfort zone. But now, with the traveler standing in front of her, with the universe waiting just beyond the walls of the café, she couldn't ignore the pull in her heart. Her fingers tightened around the device, and with a steady hand, she pressed a small button on the side. The hum grew louder, the energy in the room shifting as the light around them seemed to shimmer and warp. A soft glow surrounded the device, and a series of faint starry patterns began to appear in the air, swirling around them like galaxies coming to life. Clara's breath caught in her throat as the patterns shifted, forming a swirling vortex of light. The door to the café seemed to blur, as if the boundaries between her world and the vastness beyond were dissolving. She felt her heart race, her pulse quickening with the anticipation of what was to come. This wasn't just a journey, it was an adventure, one that would stretch across the stars. "This is it," the traveler said, his voice calm and reassuring. "Step forward, Clara. The universe is waiting for you." Clara hesitated for only a moment longer, then, without looking back, she stepped forward, into the light. The moment her foot crossed the threshold, the world around her seemed to shift. The walls of the café, the familiar scent of coffee, the soft hum of the machines, they all faded, replaced by a breathtaking expanse of starlit sky and swirling galaxies. She felt weightless, As though gravity no longer held her to the earth, the traveler followed closely behind her, his presence grounding her in the vastness of space. "Where are we going?" she asked, her voice filled with awe. The traveler smiled, his eyes shining with an unspoken promise. "Wherever the stars lead us." The landscape around them shifted again, and they found themselves standing on a vibrant, alien planet, bathed in the glow of two suns setting on the horizon. The air was cool and crisp, filled with the scent of strange flowers and distant oceans. The sky above them was alive with constellations unfamiliar to Kira, their stars twinkling like diamonds in the velvet dark. Kira gasped, her eyes wide with wonder. "Is this real?" "More real than you could ever imagine," the traveler said, his voice a whisper of reverence. She looked around, taking in the breathtaking scenery, her heart racing with excitement. It was beyond anything she had ever dreamed of. The colors, the sounds, the energy of the place, it was as though the entire universe was alive, breathing, inviting her to explore it. "This is just the beginning, Kira," the traveler said, his voice filled with quiet conviction. "There's so much more out there waiting for you. The stars, the galaxies, the mysteries of the universe, they're all yours to discover." Kira's gaze met his, and in that moment, everything felt right. She was no longer bound by the walls of the café, no longer tethered to the life she had known. She was free, free to explore, to learn, to experience the universe in ways she had never thought possible. And as they stood there, beneath the twin suns and the swirling constellations, Kira realized something she had never truly understood before. The journey wasn't just about finding a new world, that it was about finding herself. Chapter 9: Beneath the Stars. Kira had never felt so alive. The alien world they stood on was unlike anything she had ever imagined, a surreal mix of color and sound. The twin suns painted the sky in brilliant hues of red and orange, their rays casting a warm glow over the landscape that seemed to pulse with life. Strange, bioluminescent plants dotted the terrain, their gentle glow reflecting off the soft, crystalline sands beneath their feet. The air smelled of something fresh and electric, tinged with the hint of something unfamiliar, something beautiful. The traveler stood beside her, his eyes scanning the horizon, as though he, too, was drinking in the magnificence of this new world. His presence was calming, as if the weight of the universe could be carried on his shoulders without ever faltering. Kira found herself looking at him differently now. No longer just a mysterious stranger with a starry secret, but someone whose connection to the universe was as deep and vast as the very stars they had just traveled through. "Is it always like this?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The traveler smiled, a soft chuckle escaping his lips. "There's always something new to discover. But yes, this world, this place, it's special. Very few are granted the chance to see it." Kira felt a chill run through her. It wasn't fear, no, it was the exhilarating sensation of stepping into the unknown, of touching the edges of the vast cosmos that stretched out endlessly before her. She had always longed for something more, something that went beyond the confines of her small café, her small city. And now, here she was, standing on the edge of a new world, with the universe wide open before her. "So, where do we start?" she asked, turning to face him, the excitement clear in her eyes. His smile deepened, and he reached out, gently taking her hand in his. "We start by exploring. Together." The words lingered between them, charged with an unspoken understanding. In that moment, the universe itself seemed to fall away, leaving only the two of them, standing side by side beneath the vast, infinite sky. They began to walk, following a narrow, winding path that led them deeper into the alien world. The ground was soft beneath their feet, and the air grew cooler as the suns dipped lower on the horizon, casting long shadows over the landscape. Strange sounds echoed around them, faint chirps and rustlings that seemed to come from the very earth itself. Clara had always loved the quiet, the calm of her café, but now, the silence of the universe felt like a symphony, each note resonating in her heart. As they walked, the travelers shared stories of the stars, of the countless worlds he had visited, each one unique, each one holding secrets and wonders that few ever had the privilege of seeing. He spoke of distant civilizations, of ancient worlds lost to time, and of the endless possibilities that awaited them in the far reaches of space. Clara listened, captivated by his words, by the way he spoke with such passion, as if the very stars themselves had whispered their tales to him. But as much as she was enthralled by his stories, there was one question that lingered in her mind, one question she had been dying to ask but had never quite found the right moment. "Why me?" she finally asked, her voice barely audible over the hum of the alien wind. "Why did you choose me? I'm just a barista. I'm not like you." The traveler's steps faltered for just a moment, and then he turned to face her, his expression softer than it had ever been before. He held her gaze, and in his eyes, Clara saw something, a depth, a tenderness, that she hadn't noticed until now. "You're not just a barista, Clara," he said quietly. "You've always had more within you than you realize. You've always been reaching for the stars, even if you didn't know how to get there. Sometimes, all it takes is the right person to show you the way." Clara's heart fluttered in her chest, and for a moment, the world seemed to fade away. There was no café, no city, no life she had known. There was only the traveler, standing before her, his words wrapped around her like a warm embrace. Before she could respond, the ground beneath their feet began to tremble. Clara stumbled, instinctively reaching for his hand to steady herself. The traveler's grip tightened around hers, his eyes scanning the horizon with a look of sudden urgency. "We need to get to shelter," he said, his voice sharp and commanding. "Something's happening." Clara felt the tension in the air, the unease that rippled through the very earth beneath her feet. They had only just arrived on this strange planet, and already it felt as though danger was closing in. The traveler pulled her toward a nearby structure, an ancient-looking temple of sorts, its stone walls worn by time but still standing strong. They hurried inside, the cool air offering a brief respite from the tremors outside. As they entered, Clara's eyes were drawn to the symbols carved into the walls, glowing faintly in the dim light. They looked almost familiar, like constellations she had seen before in the night sky. "What is this place?" she asked, her voice filled with awe. The traveler's expression was grim. "This is a place of power. A place that holds ancient secrets. It was built to protect something, or someone. I think we've stumbled upon something we weren't meant to find." Clara's pulse quickened as she looked around, the weight of the words settling in. She had thought she was simply exploring a new world, but now, she realized, there was something more to this planet, something that tied it to the stars, to the traveler, and to her. Before she could ask another question, a loud crack split the air. The walls of the temple seemed to shift, and the ground beneath them trembled once more. The traveler's grip on her hand tightened, his eyes filled with determination. It's time to leave. Whatever happens, we stick together. Are you ready? Kira nodded, her heart racing, but a sense of calm had settled over her. She didn't know what they were facing, but one thing was certain: she wasn't alone. With the traveler at her side, she was ready for whatever came next. The universe, with all its wonders and dangers, awaited them, and they would face it, together. Chapter 10: A New Dawn. The tremors had subsided, but the silence that followed was anything but reassuring. Kira and the traveler stood in the shadow of the ancient temple, their eyes trained on the horizon where the twin suns had begun to rise again, casting a soft light over the strange, alien world. The traveler's grip on her hand remained firm, his presence grounding her in the midst of uncertainty. His usually calm demeanor had shifted, his eyes narrowed as he studied the landscape, every movement calculating. Kira could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on them both. What is it? Kira asked, her voice low but steady, betraying none of the apprehension that churned inside her. It's the energy, the traveler replied, his gaze still fixed on the distance. It's been disturbed. Something's awakened. We need to leave before it finds us. Kira's heart raced. The traveler had spoken of a powerful secret hidden on this planet, something ancient, something connected to the stars themselves. It had been the reason they'd come here, the reason they'd been drawn to this place, but now, the sense of urgency was palpable. The quiet had turned oppressive, like the calm before a storm. The sky above them began to darken as a thick cloud of swirling energy seemed to pulse from the earth, growing in intensity. The symbols on the temple walls glowed brighter, flickering like stars trapped in stone. The traveler stepped forward, pulling Kira along with him. Quickly, he urged. We don't have much time. They moved swiftly through the temple's narrow passageways, the sounds of their footsteps echoing against the ancient stone. Kira's mind raced. She couldn't shake the feeling that they were on the brink of something huge, something cosmic. But what was it? And why was she so intimately tied to it? As they reached the exit, the ground began to rumble once more, and the sky above them crackled with lightning. It was as if the planet itself was alive, shifting, changing. The traveler turned to her, his face set in determination. This is it, he said. We're close to the heart of it now. Whatever this is, it's been waiting for us. Kira nodded, though she didn't entirely understand. All she knew was that she couldn't turn back. Not now. Not after everything they had shared, everything they had discovered together. The world around them seemed to breathe with a quiet intensity as the traveler led her up a steep incline. At the peak, they found themselves facing an enormous structure, a floating spire, glowing with an otherworldly light. It pulsed like a heartbeat, drawing Kira in with its magnetic presence. What is that? She whispered, awestruck. The traveler's expression softened, and for a moment, Kira saw the flicker of something else in his eyes. Something personal, something tender. It's the source of it all, he said quietly. The stars, the energy, the connections. It's where everything begins. Kira's breath caught in her throat. It was beautiful, but also terrifying. She felt small in the face of its power, a speck of dust beneath the cosmos, but then, something shifted in the air, a subtle change, like the pulse of the universe itself responding to her presence. The traveler stepped forward, taking her hand once more. "This is where your journey truly begins," he said, his voice low and full of meaning. Without another word, he led her toward the spire. As they approached, the air around them shimmered with the same energy that had filled the temple. It was alive, vibrant, and Clara could feel it tugging at her very soul. And then, as they crossed the threshold of the spire, everything changed. The stars above them seemed to align, their light bending and twisting in intricate patterns. The energy coursed through Clara, filling her with an understanding she couldn't quite explain. It was as if she had become one with the universe, her mind expanding to take in the endless possibilities that lay before her. She looked at the traveler, her heart racing. He was beside her, just as he had always been. His hand still in hers, his gaze as steady as ever, but now there was something more, a connection that transcended words, transcended time itself. "You're ready," he said softly. "This is your moment." And Clara realized he was right. She had been ready all along. The answers she had sought, the longing she had felt for something more, this was it. This was the universe she had always belonged to, the stars she had always dreamed of reaching. Clara closed her eyes, letting the energy wash over her, feeling the vastness of it all. The mysteries, the endless worlds, the lives intertwined in a cosmic dance. It was all here, waiting for her to explore, to discover, to live. And as the traveler stood beside her, his presence a steady anchor, Clara knew that their journey was far from over. There was so much more to see, so much more to experience. Together, they would navigate the stars, unraveling the secrets of the universe one world at a time. For the first time in her life, Clara felt truly at home, and as the light of the spire wrapped around them both, she understood that this was just the beginning. The stars were no longer a distant dream. They were her reality now, and she was ready to dance among them.